The first light of dawn crept through the bedroom curtains as Diane quietly zipped up her suitcase. She paused, listening to the familiar creaks of their old two-story house and the soft, rhythmic breathing coming from the other side of the bed where Thomas slept. The digital clock on the nightstand showed 5:17 a.m. She had about 20 minutes before he might stir for his early shower. Diane's hands trembled as she pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket. She'd rewritten the note 5 times last night in the downstairs bathroom, trying to find words that could somehow justify what she was about to do. Nothing seemed right. How could it? In the end, she'd kept it brief. A clean cut might be kinder than a messy explanation that wouldn't make sense to anyone, not even herself. She placed the note on her pillow, smoothing out a wrinkle with her thumb. For a moment, she stood watching Thomas sleep. His face, usually tense with worry about bills and work deadlines, looked peaceful. The lines around his eyes softened in sleep, making him look more like the young man she'd fallen in love with 12 years ago, before life had piled responsibility after responsibility on his shoulders, before she'd added to those burdens with her own struggles that she couldn't seem to overcome. Diane picked up her suitcase and quietly made her way down the hallway, pausing at each of the 3 bedroom doors. The twins, Josh and Jessica, shared the first room. At 8 years old, they were already so different. Josh with his endless energy and questions about how things worked. Jessica with her serious eyes and notebooks filled with stories. Kevin had the middle room, where at 6 years old he'd recently declared he was too big to sleep with a nightlight, though Diane noticed he still kept his stuffed tiger close. In the last room, 4-year-old Lily and 18-month-old Alex shared the space. Lily with her wild curls splayed across her pillow and baby Alex, thumb in mouth, curled up in his crib. 5 children under 9. The thought alone made her chest tighten with a familiar panic. Diane had never planned on a big family. They'd wanted 2, maybe 3 kids at most. But life had other plans. The twins came first, then Kevin was a surprise blessing. They'd decided to try for one more, hoping for another girl to balance things out, and got Lily. Then Alex arrived when she missed a few pills during a particularly chaotic month. 5 beautiful, wonderful, exhausting children. She loved them. That wasn't the question. She loved them so much it physically hurt sometimes, but lately that love had twisted into something darker, heavier. A crushing weight of inadequacy that whispered constantly that they deserved better than what she could give them. Diane worked 3 12-hour shifts a week as a nurse at the county hospital, but the other 4 days weren't restful. They were filled with school runs, grocery shopping, doctor appointments, homework help, breaking up fights, cooking meals no one wanted to eat, and endless loads of laundry. Thomas helped when he could, but his job as a project manager at the construction company had him working 6 days a week, often 10 hours a day, just to keep them afloat financially. She pressed her palm against each door as she passed, a silent goodbye. In the living room, she nearly tripped over Josh's science project, a solar system made of painted styrofoam balls that they'd stayed up late finishing on Sunday night. She steadied herself on the worn couch, the same one they'd bought when they first moved in, when the twins were just 6 months old and the future seemed bright and manageable. The kitchen was still messy from last night's dinner. She'd meant to clean up, but after getting all 5 kids bathed and in bed, she'd collapsed on the couch instead. Now dishes were piled in the sink, crusted with the remains of spaghetti sauce. Another failure to add to her growing list. Diane set her suitcase by the front door and went back to the kitchen. She could at least do this one last thing. She filled the sink with hot water and soap, scrubbing each plate and fork with unusual care, as if this small act could somehow make up for what she was about to do. When the dishes were clean and drying in the rack, she wiped down the counters and table, throwing away the children's half-finished juice boxes and picking up forgotten crayons. The house was quiet, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling wood. This was the only time the house ever felt peaceful, these early morning hours before chaos descended. Once upon a time, she'd treasured these moments, sipping coffee and watching the sunrise before everyone woke up. Now she couldn't remember the last time she'd done that. There was always a child who needed something, a task that couldn't wait, or she was simply too exhausted to get up before absolutely necessary. Back at the front door, Diane picked up her suitcase and took one last look around. Pictures lined the walls of the entryway. The twins' first birthday, Kevin riding his bike without training wheels, Lily in her dance costume, Thomas holding newborn Alex with tears in his eyes. Their life together, captured in frozen moments of happiness. The problem was the moments in between those pictures, the endless days of feeling like she was drowning, struggling to keep her head above water, the nights she locked herself in the bathroom and cried silently so no one would hear, the growing emptiness inside her that nothing seemed to fill, not her children's laughter, not Thomas's tired smiles, not the pills her doctor prescribed that made her feel like a zombie. Dr. Patel called it postpartum depression, but it had started long before Alex was born. She'd been fighting it since the twins, each pregnancy pushing her further into a darkness she couldn't explain to anyone. Thomas tried to understand, but he had his own struggles keeping them financially afloat. Her mother had told her to count her blessings and push through it, saying every mother felt overwhelmed sometimes. But this was more than feeling overwhelmed. This was a constant crushing certainty that her family would be better off without her, that she was failing them every day and her presence was doing more harm than good. That one day, the darkness would win, and she might do something truly unforgivable. The front door opened silently. She'd oiled the hinges yesterday, planning ahead. The early morning air was cool against her face as she stepped onto the porch. Their neighborhood was still asleep, the street empty except for Mrs. Wilson's cat prowling under a nearby streetlight. The bus wouldn't come for another 20 minutes, but Diane needed to be well away by then. She couldn't risk running into any neighbors who might ask questions. Her old blue sedan was parked a block away. She'd moved it last night after everyone was asleep, another part of her careful planning. The car was packed with essentials, some clothes, toiletries, important documents, and the emergency cash she'd been secretly setting aside in small amounts for months. Not enough to live on for long, but enough to get her to her cousin's place in Ohio, where she could stay until she figured out next steps. As she walked down the street, the weight of her decision pressed on her chest. Was she really going to do this? Leave her family? What kind of mother abandoned her children? The questions swirled, making her dizzy with doubt and self-loathing. But then came the other thoughts, the ones that had driven her to this moment. They'll be better without you. You're hurting them by staying. Thomas is a better parent anyway. Your children deserve a mother who isn't broken inside. You're teaching them that it's normal to be sad all the time. She reached her car and threw the suitcase in the back seat. Her hands were shaking so badly now that it took 3 attempts to get the key in the ignition. As the engine rumbled to life, she caught sight of herself in the rearview mirror. Dark circles under bloodshot eyes, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, skin pale and drawn. She barely recognized herself anymore. "Just drive," she whispered, gripping the steering wheel. "Just go." As she pulled away from the curb, the first tears began to fall. By the time she reached the highway, she was sobbing so hard she had to pull over. She sat there, forehead pressed against the steering wheel, body racked with grief and guilt. But she didn't turn around. When the tears finally subsided, she wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweater, took a deep breath, and pulled back onto the road. The rising sun cast long shadows across the pavement as she drove away from the only life she'd known for the past decade, leaving behind 5 sleeping children and their father, who would soon wake to find her gone. Back at the house, Thomas's alarm would go off in exactly 17 minutes. He would reach across the bed, find it empty, and think Diane had already gotten up to start breakfast or help one of the kids. It would be another 10 minutes before he found the note on her pillow. Another 5 before the reality hit him, and then his world and the world of their 5 children would change forever. Thomas stared at the note in his hands, reading it for what must have been the 100th time that week. The paper had grown soft from handling, the creases threatening to tear. "I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry, I love you all, but I need to go. Please don't try to find me." 14 words. That's all she'd left after 10 years of marriage and 5 children. The house was finally quiet. It had taken hours to get everyone to bed. Josh had fought sleep the hardest tonight, asking again when Mom was coming home. Thomas had no answer. That felt right. So he'd just hugged his son tighter and promised to make pancakes in the morning. It had been 7 weeks since Diane left. 7 weeks of chaos, tears, confusion, and a bone-deep exhaustion unlike anything Thomas had ever known. He slumped onto the couch, surrounded by unfolded laundry and toys he'd meant to put away. The kitchen was a disaster zone of dirty dishes and half-eaten meals. A stack of bills sat unopened on the coffee table. He should tackle at least one of these things, but his body refused to move. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Coming. By at 7 tomorrow. Don't argue. You need help." Thomas didn't have the energy to argue anymore. His mother had moved in temporarily right after Diane left, but he'd insisted she go home after 2 weeks, convinced he could handle things. He was their father, after all. But the truth hit him harder each day. He was drowning. His construction company had been surprisingly understanding, allowing him to work remotely when possible and adjusting his hours. But he still needed to be on site most days, which meant finding childcare for the younger ones and arranging transportation for the twins and Kevin to and from school. His savings were draining fast, paying for a babysitter, and his mother could only help so much with her own health issues. Sleep eventually claimed him there on the couch, still in his work clothes, the TV murmuring in the background. It felt like minutes later when a small hand patted his cheek. Thomas opened his eyes, to find Alex, his youngest, standing beside the couch in his dinosaur pajamas, thumb in mouth. "Daddy, bad dream," the toddler whispered. Thomas lifted him onto the couch, checking his watch. 3:17 a.m. He'd get maybe 2 more hours of sleep before needing to start the morning routine. "It's okay, buddy," he murmured, pulling his son close. "Daddy's here." Alex settled against his chest, and soon his breathing slowed into sleep. Thomas stared at the ceiling, his mind racing with all the things he needed to do tomorrow. Drop the twins at school, take Kevin to his doctor's appointment, fix the leak under the kitchen sink, finish the project proposal for work, call about the overdue electric bill, remember to buy more diapers. His thoughts drifted to Diane. Where was she now? Was she okay? Did she miss them? The anger he'd felt those first few days had gradually given way to worry, then a dull ache of loss. He'd called her parents, her friends, even hospitals in the area, terrified something had happened to her. Eventually, her cousin in Ohio admitted Diane had contacted her, saying only that she was safe and needed time. The cousin refused to say more, and Thomas stopped asking. At least Diane was alive. At least there was that. Morning arrived too quickly. Thomas's mother showed up as promised, taking one look at the house and rolling up her sleeves without comment. She started a load of laundry, while Thomas got the kids dressed and fed. The twins were becoming more self-sufficient out of necessity, helping with Lily while Thomas changed Alex and packed Kevin's backpack. "You need a system," his mother said later, after the older kids were at school and the younger ones were napping. She was organizing the kitchen cabinets, something Thomas hadn't had time to think about. A place for everything, and everything in its place. "It's the only way you'll survive this." Thomas nodded, typing an email to his boss about the project deadline. "I know, Mom, I'm figuring it out." She paused, hands on her hips. "Have you thought about what I said? About the support group?" "I don't have time for that," Thomas said without looking up. "Between work and the kids, you won't have anything if you don't take care of yourself," she interrupted. "The church runs it. They have childcare. Thursday nights. I'll stay with the kids if you don't want to bring them." Thomas started to refuse again, but the concern in his mother's eyes stopped him. "Fine. I'll try it. Once." Thursday came, and Thomas found himself in the basement of a local church, sitting in a circle with 7 other single parents. He'd almost turned around 3 times on the drive over. What could these strangers possibly tell him that would make any difference? But as they began to share their stories, the woman whose husband died of cancer, leaving her with 3 young children, the man whose wife's addiction tore their family apart, the parent whose spouse simply walked away one day, Thomas felt something inside him crack open, These people understood. They knew the unique pain and challenge of being both mother and father, of carrying a weight meant for two people. When it was his turn to speak, the words spilled out. About finding the note. About the twins asking endless questions he couldn't answer. About 4-year-old Lily calling every woman she saw mommy. About his fear of failing his children, of not being enough. He left that night with something he hadn't expected: phone numbers of people who promised to call and check on him, resources for affordable childcare, and the name of a therapist who worked on a sliding scale. Most importantly, he left with the knowledge that he wasn't alone. The days blurred together as spring turned to summer. Thomas developed systems, as his mother suggested: chore charts for the older kids, meal prep on Sundays, a family calendar, color-coded for each person, a bedtime routine that actually worked most nights. It wasn't perfect, but it was functional. The twins finished 2nd grade with decent grades despite the upheaval at home. Josh threw himself into sports, his competitive nature finding an outlet on the soccer field. Jessica became quieter, writing in journals that she kept hidden under her mattress. Kevin, always the sensitive one, started having nightmares and climbing into Thomas's bed almost every night. Lily's tantrums grew less frequent as the new routines took hold, though she still asked about her mother nearly every day. And Alex, too young to fully understand what had happened, attached himself to Thomas like a shadow whenever he was home. Thomas continued attending the support group each Thursday. Sometimes he just listened. Sometimes he shared small victories: Alex sleeping through the night, Kevin making a new friend, figuring out how to braid Lily's hair by watching YouTube tutorials. The group celebrated these moments with him, understanding their significance in a way others couldn't. It was at one of these meetings that Thomas met Ray, a carpenter who'd been raising his daughter alone for 3 years. Ray offered to teach Thomas some basics about home repairs, saving him hundreds in plumber and electrician bills. In return, Thomas helped Ray design a built-in bookshelf for his daughter's room. This exchange grew into a friendship, and soon, they were carpooling to meetings and occasionally getting coffee afterward, squeezing in adult conversation between parenting responsibilities. "You know what saved me that first year?" Ray said one evening as they sat on Thomas's porch, the kids all finally asleep inside. "Deciding that I wasn't going to just survive this. I was going to find a way to make something good out of it." Thomas stared into his coffee mug. "I'm still in survival mode." "That's okay," Ray said. "But keep your eyes open for the moments when it can be more than that." Those words stayed with Thomas. He began looking for opportunities, however small, to move beyond mere survival. Started a tradition of adventure Saturdays, taking the kids to explore parks, museums, or community events that were free or low cost. He taught the twins to cook simple meals, turning it into a game rather than a chore. He took a free online course in personal finance during his lunch breaks at work, determined to get their budget under control. 6 months after Diane left, Thomas got a promotion at work. The raise wasn't huge, but it allowed him to hire a part-time college student as an after-school helper, giving him breathing room to focus better on his job during the day. His boss had noticed his determination despite the personal challenges, and the company valued his skills enough to create a more flexible position that better accommodated his family situation. The children's reactions to their mother's absence evolved. Josh became fiercely protective of his siblings, especially Jessica, who withdrew into books and art. Kevin's nightmares gradually subsided, replaced by an interest in music that Thomas encouraged by finding a used keyboard at a garage sale. Lily stopped asking about her mother every day, though she still kept a photo by her bed. Alex, now approaching his 2nd birthday, sometimes looked confused when other children's mothers came to pick them up from daycare. Thomas kept Diane's note pinned to his closet door, not as a reminder of abandonment, but as a strange kind of motivation. "I can do this," he would whisper to himself on the hardest days. "We can do this." 1 year after Diane left, Thomas took the children to the beach. It was the first real vacation they'd had, funded by careful saving and his mother's contribution as an early birthday gift. As he watched his 5 children playing, in the sand, Their laughter carrying over the sound of waves, Thomas realized something had shifted within him. The crushing weight of abandonment had transformed into something else. Not acceptance exactly, but a determination to build something new from what remained. That night, after tucking the exhausted children into their hotel beds, Thomas sat on the balcony overlooking the ocean. For the first time in a year, he allowed himself to wonder not just where Diane was, but who they would become without her. The path ahead was still unclear, but he was no longer just surviving. They were finding their way forward one day at a time. 5 years had passed since the morning Thomas found the note on Diane's pillow. The house that had once felt impossibly chaotic now hummed with a different kind of energy. Still busy, still loud at times, but organized in its own way. The family calendar that hung in the kitchen was packed with color-coded activities. Basketball practice for Josh, science club for Jessica, piano lessons for Kevin, dance class for Lily, and playgroup for Alex, now a chatty 6-year-old who barely remembered the mother who had left when he was still in diapers. Thomas stood in the kitchen making lunches for the next day, his movements efficient after years of practice. Turkey sandwiches for Josh and Kevin, peanut butter and banana for Jessica, who had recently declared herself vegetarian, and chicken nuggets in a thermos for Lily, who would eat little else lately. Alex would buy lunch at school, a small independence he cherished. "Dad, can you look at this?" Jessica appeared in the doorway holding her science project, a detailed model of a sustainable house with tiny solar panels on the roof and miniature rain barrels alongside it. Thomas wiped his hands on a dish, towel, and examined her work. At 13, Jessica had developed a passion for environmental science that amazed him. "This looks incredible. You did all this yourself?" She nodded, pride evident in her smile. "Mrs. Chen says I might win the regional science fair if I can improve the presentation part." "I have no doubt," Thomas said, giving her shoulder a squeeze. "We can practice your speech this weekend if you want." "Thanks, Dad." She set the model carefully on the counter. "Josh is hogging the bathroom again." Thomas glanced at the clock. "Tell him he has 5 more minutes, then it's your turn." As Jessica left, his phone buzzed with a text from his boss. "Board loved your presentation. They want to move forward with the pilot program." "Congratulations." A smile spread across Thomas's face. After years of working his way up at the construction company, he'd recently been promoted to Director of Special Projects. His latest proposal, affordable housing, specifically designed for single-parent families, had been a risk. The designs incorporated features like shared childcare spaces, flexible room layouts that could grow with families, and built-in storage solutions that maximized limited space. They weren't just buildings, they were communities designed to support people in situations like his. The idea had come to him late one night in the basement, which he'd converted into a home office 3 years ago. Unable to sleep, surrounded by the kids' artwork and school schedules, he'd started sketching. What would have made those first terrible months after Diane left easier? What kind of home would have better supported their suddenly changed family? Those rough sketches had evolved into detailed plans, and eventually a proposal that his company had now agreed to fund as a pilot program. 3 buildings would be constructed in their city, with 20 units each. If successful, the model could be replicated in other locations. "Dad." Lily's voice interrupted his thoughts as she bounded into the kitchen, her curly hair escaping from its braid. "I need to bring cupcakes tomorrow for Jacob's birthday." Thomas looked at his 9-year-old daughter, trying to keep his voice level. "And when did you find out about this?" Lily twisted the hem of her shirt. "Maybe last week?" Thomas took a deep breath. "Okay, we don't have time to bake tonight, but we'll stop at the store on the way to school tomorrow." "Thanks, Dad. You're the best." She hugged him quickly before darting back upstairs. Just another day in the life, Thomas thought as he finished packing the lunches. The early years after Diane left had been about survival, just making it through each day. But somewhere along the way they had found their rhythm. It wasn't perfect. There were still forgotten cupcakes and arguments over bathroom time, but they were more than surviving now. They were living. Later that night, after all 5 kids were finally in bed, Thomas sat at his desk in the basement looking over the housing project plans. The board's approval meant he'd be busier than ever in the coming months, but the excitement of seeing his idea become reality made the extra work worth it. His phone buzzed again, a text from Vanessa, a woman he'd met through a parent volunteer group at the kids' school. Still on for coffee Saturday while the kids are at practice? They'd been meeting for coffee occasionally for a few months now. Not quite dating. Thomas wasn't sure he was ready for that label yet, but something. A friendship that might be becoming more. The kids had met her a few times at school events, and while they weren't exactly pushing for a new mother figure, they hadn't objected to her presence either. Looking forward to it, he texted back. He set his phone down, suddenly, aware of how much had changed. 5 years ago, the thought of meeting someone new had seemed impossible. His life had been consumed by grief and the overwhelming responsibility of raising 5 children alone. The idea that he might someday find space in his heart for another relationship hadn't even been on the horizon. The next morning brought the usual controlled chaos of getting everyone ready for school. Josh, now 13 and as tall as Thomas, was obsessed with his appearance, spending too long on his hair. Jessica moved efficiently through her morning routine, always the most organized of the siblings. Kevin, 11 and perpetually dreamy, had to be reminded twice to put on his shoes. Lily bounced around the kitchen, talking non-stop about her dance recital coming up next month. Alex, the baby, no longer proudly wore his "I'm a first grader" shirt that still looked too big on his small frame. Thomas navigated the morning traffic, dropping off the kids at their respective schools before heading to the office. His commute had become his thinking time, the 20 minutes when he could process the day ahead or decompress from the one just ended. Today, his mind was on the housing project. The first building would break ground in 3 months. He'd need to finalize the details with the architects, secure the permits, and set up the application process for potential residents. He wanted to make sure single parents got priority, especially those with multiple children. His office was covered with drawings and plans when his assistant knocked on the door. The local news station called. They want to do a story on the single-parent housing initiative. They're calling it innovative. Thomas looked up, surprised. Really? Yes, really. They want to interview you next week. I told them I'd check your schedule. It was strange to think that others found his idea noteworthy. To him, it had simply been a solution to a problem he understood intimately: how to create homes that worked better for families like his. The interview went well the following week. Thomas spoke from experience without revealing too much of his personal story. These homes are designed with real families in mind, he explained to the reporter. Families that might be dealing with unique challenges and need spaces that support them rather than create additional stress. The story aired on the evening news, and by the next morning, Thomas's phone was ringing constantly. Other news outlets wanted interviews. City officials from neighboring communities called to express interest in the concept. Single parents reached out to ask how they could apply. His company quickly recognized the potential and increased funding for the project. What had started as a personal mission was becoming something much bigger. At home, the kids watched the news segment together, erupting in cheers when their dad appeared on screen. "You're famous now," Alex shouted, jumping on the couch despite house rules against it. "Hardly," Thomas laughed, though he felt a flush of pride at their excitement. Jessica, always the most perceptive, studied him carefully. "This is because of what happened with Mom, isn't it? You're helping people like us." The room quieted. They rarely spoke directly about Diane's absence anymore. It had become the background of their lives, a fact that shaped them but wasn't constantly acknowledged. Thomas sat down, pulling Alex onto his lap. "Partly, yes, I learned a lot about what works and what doesn't when you're raising kids on your own. I thought maybe those lessons could help other families." Josh nodded slowly. "It's cool that you turned it into something good. That's what we do," Thomas said, looking around at each of their faces. "We take what life gives us and we make something good from it." As the project progressed, Thomas found himself working longer hours, but he was careful to maintain the family routines they'd established. Friday movie nights remained sacred. Sunday dinners at his mother's house continued. He never missed a basketball game, science fair, piano recital, dance performance, or school play if he could help it. The children continued to grow and change. Josh was showing real talent in basketball, with coaches already talking about high school varsity. Jessica's science project won first place at regionals, earning her a spot at the state competition. Kevin's piano playing had progressed to the point where his teacher suggested more advanced lessons. Lily performed a solo in Nair, her dance recital, beaming with pride as her family cheered from the audience. And Alex started reading above his grade level, bringing home books that his siblings had enjoyed at his age. 5 years had transformed them all. The pain of abandonment hadn't disappeared, but it had changed shape. It was no longer a raw wound, but a part of their shared history, something that had made them stronger, more resilient, more appreciative of each other. One evening, as Thomas helped Jessica prepare for a presentation on her science project, she looked up from her notes and asked, "Do you ever wonder where Mom is now? What she's doing?" Thomas paused. It had been a long time since any of the children had asked about Diane so directly. "Sometimes," he answered honestly. "I hope she found what she was looking for. I hope she's okay." Jessica nodded, seeming satisfied with his answer. "Me too. But I'm glad we're okay without her." "We're more than okay," Thomas said, his throat tight with unexpected emotion. "We're pretty amazing, actually." And they were. Together, they had built something strong and beautiful from the broken pieces Diane had left behind. It wasn't the life Thomas had planned, but looking at his children, their resilience, their compassion, their determination, he couldn't help but feel a fierce pride in the family they had become. The small apartment in Northern California had become Diane's sanctuary over the past 8 years. It wasn't much, a 1-bedroom unit in a quiet complex with a small balcony where she grew herbs and tomatoes in pots. The walls were painted a soft blue, and framed photographs of landscapes hung in careful arrangements. No family photos. Those remained tucked away in a box under her bed, too painful to display but impossible to discard. Diane sat at her kitchen table, coffee cooling beside her as she scrolled through her tablet. The morning sunlight cast patterns on the worn wooden surface as she read through patient files before her shift at the community clinic, where she'd worked for the past 5 years. After bouncing between temporary nursing jobs when she first arrived in California, the clinic had become her professional home. The work was demanding but fulfilling, providing health care to underserved populations, many of whom reminded her of the patients she'd treated back in Atlanta. Even after nearly 10 years, the name of the city still caused a tightening in her chest. She'd made a life for herself here on the West Coast, but Georgia, and what she'd left behind there, remained a shadow that lengthened or shortened, but never fully disappeared. Her phone alarm chimed, reminding her to take her medication. The small blue pill and the therapy sessions that accompanied it had been life-changing. It had taken 3 different antidepressants before finding this one, which lifted the heaviness without dulling her emotions entirely. Weekly sessions with Dr. Chen had gradually become monthly, then quarterly check-ins as Diane learned to recognize her triggers and develop healthier coping mechanisms. The depression wasn't your fault, Dr. Chen had told her during one pivotal session, but healing is your responsibility. Those words had become something of a mantra for Diane. She couldn't change the past, couldn't undo the pain she'd caused by leaving, but she could work on becoming healthier, more whole. She swallowed the pill with the last of her coffee and closed her tablet. Time to get ready for work. As she showered and dressed in her navy scrubs, her mind wandered to her upcoming therapy session. Dr. Chen had been encouraging her to consider reaching out to her family for years now. Not to insert yourself back into their lives, she'd clarified, but for closure. For them and for you. Diane had always refused, convinced that any contact from her would only reopen wounds that had surely begun to heal. What right did she have to disrupt their lives again after walking away? The guilt of her decision had softened over time but never disappeared. In her darkest moments, she still believed they were better off without her, without the risk that she might have harmed them during those days when the depression had been at its worst. Her shift at the clinic passed in a blur of patience, paperwork, and the familiar rhythm of taking vitals, administering medications, and offering comfort where medicine couldn't. During her lunch break, she scrolled absently through news articles on her phone, a habit she'd developed to stay connected to the wider world beyond her small circle of colleagues and the few friends she'd made. An article about innovative housing solutions caught her attention. Not her usual reading material, but something about the headline drew her in. New housing model revolutionizes support for single-parent families. She skimmed the first few paragraphs, impressed by the concept of homes designed specifically for the unique challenges faced by solo parents. Then she saw his name, and the world seemed to stop. Thomas Walker, Director of Special Projects at Horizon Construction, the visionary behind these groundbreaking designs. There was even a photo. Thomas standing in front of architectural renderings, looking older, more distinguished, with touches of gray at his temples that hadn't been there when she left. Diane's hand trembled as she zoomed in on the image. The man she'd married was still visible in his features, but there was something different about him now. A confidence, a steadiness that spoke of someone who had been tested and emerged stronger. The article quoted him, "These homes are designed by someone who understands the daily reality of raising children alone. Every feature addresses a specific challenge I've experienced personally or heard from other single parents." She read the article 3 times, searching for any mention of the children. But there was nothing beyond a brief reference to Thomas being a father of 5. Were they okay? How had they grown? What kind of people were they becoming without her? That evening, Diane couldn't focus on anything. She paced her small apartment, the article playing on a loop in her mind. After all these years of self-imposed exile, of telling herself that disappearing was the kindest thing she could do for her family, here was Thomas, not just surviving, but thriving, creating something meaningful from the very circumstance she had forced upon him. "I need to see your laptop history," Dr. Chen said at their next session after Diane explained her discovery. "What? Why?" "Because I suspect this isn't the first time you've looked him up," Dr. Chen said gently. "I think you've been checking on them for years but not telling me." Diane stared at her hands. "Not years. Just occasionally. When things get hard. When I need to remind myself that they're okay without me." "And are they? Okay?" "Better than okay, it seems." Diane's voice caught. "He's doing amazing things, important things. Does that surprise you?" "No. Thomas was always capable of greatness. He just had me holding him back." Dr. Chen's expression remained neutral, but her voice sharpened slightly. "That's the depression talking again, Diane. You didn't hold him back. You were ill. There's a difference." They spent the rest of the session discussing what it might mean to make contact after so many years. The risks, the potential outcomes, the realistic expectations Diane should have. "They might not want to hear from you," Dr. Chen warned. "You need to be prepared for that possibility." "I know," Diane nodded. "I wouldn't blame them. But they might also be waiting for you to reach out. There's only one way to find out." It took 3 weeks and 4 drafted emails before Diane finally sent one. Simple, direct, with no expectations. "Thomas, I hope this email finds you well. I recently came across an article about your housing initiative for single parents and wanted to say how impressed I am by what you've created. Your designs show such thoughtfulness and understanding of the challenges faced by solo parents. It's truly remarkable work that will help many families. I'm doing well and have found stability in my life. I just wanted you to know that. Diane." She hit send before she could change her mind, then immediately regretted it. What was she thinking? What right did she have to intrude on his life after all this time? He would probably delete it without responding, and that would be completely justified. To her shock, a reply came the very next day. "Diane, thank you for your message. It was unexpected but not unwelcome. I'm glad to hear you're doing well. The housing project has been fulfilling work. The first building is almost complete with families moving in next month. Thomas. His response was cautious, restrained, giving nothing away about the children or whether he harbored anger toward her. But he had responded. That alone was more than she had dared to hope for. Over the next several months, they exchanged occasional emails. Professional at first, Diane asking questions about the housing project, Thomas responding with polite details. Gradually, the tone shifted. Diane shared about her work at the clinic. Thomas mentioned a coding camp Josh was attending that summer. It was the first reference to any of the children, and Diane stared at the name on her screen for a long time, trying to imagine her son, who had been 8 when she left, now as a teenager interested in computers. How are they all doing? She finally found the courage to ask directly. The children? Thomas's reply came 2 days later, longer than his previous messages. They're doing well, all things considered. Josh is 16 now, taller than me and captain of the basketball team. Jessica is equally tall and brilliant, planning to study environmental science in college. Kevin is 14 and plays piano beautifully. Lily is 12 and dances, ballet and jazz. Alex is 9 and reads constantly. They've all had their struggles with your absence, but they're resilient kids. They've had to be. Diane read the message through tears. Her children, not really children anymore, living their lives, developing talents and passions growing up without her. She had missed so much. First days of school, lost teeth, sports games, recitals, birthdays. All the ordinary moments that make up a childhood. Do they ever ask about me? She wrote back. Less often now. Thomas replied honestly. In the beginning, it was constant. Now it's mostly on birthdays or when something significant happens. They wonder where you are, if you're okay. What did you tell them? The truth, as much as I understood it, that you were struggling with depression and needed to leave to take care of yourself. That your leaving wasn't their fault. That you loved them, but couldn't stay. His words pierced her heart. He had given them an explanation that protected them, that placed no blame. He had been more generous in her absence than she probably deserved. Thank you for that, she wrote, for not making them hate me. That wouldn't have helped anyone, he responded. Their correspondence continued, cautious, but increasingly open. Diane shared about her diagnosis, her treatment, the work she'd done to understand why she'd felt she had no choice but to leave. Thomas shared more stories about the children, about the challenges of raising them alone, about the support systems he'd built. After 9 months of emails, Diane finally typed the question she'd been afraid to ask. Would it be possible for me to see them? Not to disrupt their lives or yours, just to see them, maybe talk if they're willing. I understand if the answer is no. Thomas's reply didn't come for a week, the longest he'd gone without responding since they'd begun writing. Diane prepared herself for rejection, knowing it would be completely justified. When his email finally arrived, she had to read it 3 times to believe it. I think that might be possible. They're old enough now to have a say in this decision. I'll talk to them and let you know. It would have to be on their terms, in a way that feels safe for them. Hope, fragile but undeniable, bloomed in Diane's chest. She wrote back immediately. Of course, whatever they need, whenever they're ready. Thank you, Thomas. 2 more weeks passed before his next message, the shortest he'd ever sent. They want to meet you. I'm texting you an address. Next Saturday, 2 p.m. Diane requested time. Off from work, booked a flight to Atlanta and spent hours agonizing over what to wear, what to say, whether to bring gifts. She settled on simple clothes, no gifts, and the promise to herself that she would accept whatever reception awaited her. Anger, curiosity, indifference. She had forfeited the right to expect anything when she walked away 10 years ago, as her plane touched down in Atlanta, the city she had once called home. Diane felt a strange mix of terror and peace. Whatever happened tomorrow, she would finally face the consequences of her choice. The long limbo of separation would end, replaced by something. Rejection, perhaps. Possibly forgiveness. Most likely something complicated in between. Diane stood on the sidewalk checking the address Thomas had sent against the building in front of her. This wasn't right. She'd expected a house, their old home, or perhaps a new one he'd purchased. Instead, she faced a modern two-story building, with large windows and a small garden out front. A sign near the entrance read, Walker Family Foundation. She checked her phone again. No, this was definitely the address. Her heart raced as she approached the entrance, wondering what Thomas had planned. Was this some kind of neutral meeting? Ground? Perhaps he'd thought meeting at home would be too intimate, too painful. The glass doors slid open as she approached, revealing a bright, welcoming lobby bustling with activity. Children of various ages sat in small groups at colorful tables, some working on homework, others engaged in art projects. A few adults moved between the tables, offering guidance and encouragement. Diane stood frozen just inside the entrance, uncertain where to go or who to ask for Thomas. As she hesitated, a young boy, maybe 11 or 12, approached her with a clipboard and a confident smile. "Hi. Are you here for tutoring or one of the classes?" he asked, his voice bright and professional. Diane stared at him. Something achingly familiar in the shape of his eyes, the curve of his smile. I'm looking for Thomas Walker," she managed to say. The boy's expression shifted subtly. "Oh, are you—" He paused, studying her face carefully. "Are you Diane?" Her breath caught. "Yes, and you're—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't believe what she was seeing. "Alex," he confirmed, his voice quieter now. "I'm Alex, her youngest. The baby she'd left when he was barely walking, too young to have any real memories of her. Now standing before her, almost a teenager, looking at her with curious eyes that held no recognition, only the knowledge that she was someone from a story he'd been told. "Dad said you might come today," Alex continued, his professional demeanor returning. "He's in a meeting but should be done soon. I can show you around while you wait if you want." Diane nodded, not trusting herself to speak. This poised, confident boy was her son, offering to guide her like any visitor. She followed him through the lobby, listening as he explained the center's programs with practiced ease. "We have after-school tutoring every weekday," Alex explained, gesturing to the groups of children. "And there's a recording studio down that hall where Kevin, that's my brother, teaches music lessons." He pointed to another corridor. "The computer lab is over there. Josh runs coding workshops on Tuesdays and Thursdays." Diane absorbed his words, trying to process that her children were not just visitors here, but actively involved in whatever this place was. "Alex," she finally interrupted. "What is this place? Why did your dad want to meet here?" Alex looked surprised. "This is our foundation. Dad started it 5 years ago. I thought you knew." He led her to a wall covered with framed photographs and newspaper clippings. "See? It started with Dad's housing projects, but then it grew into this." The wall told a story through headlines and images. "Innovative housing design supports single parents. Walker Housing Initiative expands to 3 cities. Foundation opens community center for families in transition." In many of the photos, Thomas stood with community leaders, politicians, and groups of families, often with one or more of the children at his side. "The center helps all kinds of families," Alex continued, "but especially single parents. There's childcare, job training, counseling, legal advice, and all the stuff Dad says would have helped him when Mom left." The casual mention of herself, "when Mom left," hit Diane like a physical blow. To Alex, she wasn't a person with thoughts and feelings, but an event that had happened, the mother who left. "There's Dad," Alex said suddenly, waving toward a man emerging from a hallway. Thomas walked toward them and Diane's heart raced. He'd aged well, a bit more gray in his hair, lines around his eyes that crinkled when he smiled at Alex, his build still strong but carrying a dignified maturity that hadn't been there before. He wore a simple button-down shirt and khakis, professional but approachable. "Thanks, Alex," he said, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Can you check if Jessica needs help with the science group?" Alex nodded, gave Diane one more curious, Look, and headed off down a hallway. Thomas and Diane stood facing each other, 10 years of absence hanging between them like a physical presence. "Hello, Diane," he said finally. His voice was steady, neither warm nor cold. "Thomas, this is..." She gestured around them. "I don't know what to say. This isn't what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I thought we'd meet at home. Your home, I mean." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "This is my home in many ways. This is what your leaving created." He led her through the center, explaining how it had evolved from his initial housing designs. After the first buildings were successful, we secured funding to expand the concept. Then we realized housing was just one piece of the puzzle. Single parents need community, resources, support. The center offered everything from emergency childcare to career counseling, health services to financial planning. And at every turn, Diane saw evidence of her children's involvement. In a bright room filled with plants and recycled art projects, she found Jessica, now a willowy young woman with braided hair, leading a group of children in an environmental science experiment. Jessica looked up as they entered, her expression carefully neutral as she excused herself from the group. "Hi," she said simply, standing before Diane with a quiet confidence. "Jessica," Diane breathed, "you're so grown up." "That happens in 10 years, Jessica replied, not unkindly, but matter-of-factly. "Dad says you're doing better now." "Yes, much better," Jessica nodded. "That's good. I have to get back to my group, but maybe we can talk later." In the recording studio, Kevin, lanky and artistic with headphones around his neck, was helping a teenage girl adjust a microphone. He showed less reserve than Jessica, giving Diane an awkward half-hug before eagerly showing her the equipment he used to teach music production to kids who couldn't afford private lessons. "Music really helped me process stuff when I was younger," he explained, his fingers fidgeting with a dial. "Now I get to share that with other kids going through hard things." They found Lily in a dance studio, teaching a group of young girls. At 16, she moved with grace and confidence, her resemblance to Diane so striking it brought tears to her eyes. Lily was more guarded, keeping physical distance between them, but she spoke about her dance program with pride. "We offer scholarships," she explained, "so kids can still have activities even when money is tight." Josh was the last and the most difficult. Now 18 and headed to college in the fall, he stood tall and serious in the computer lab. He shook Diane's hand formally, as if greeting a stranger. "Josh runs our technology programs," Thomas explained, a note of pride in his voice. "He's developed a mentorship model that pairs teens with younger kids." "That's impressive," Diane said, meaning it. "You've accomplished so much." Josh met her gaze directly. "Dad taught us that you can choose what to build from what breaks you." His words weren't meant to wound, but they pierced her heart nonetheless. She was the breaking they had built from. Thomas led her to his office, a modest room with a desk covered in papers and walls lined with children's artwork alongside professional certificates. "Why did you want to meet here?" Diane asked as they sat down. "Why show me all this?" Thomas considered her question. "I wanted you to see that your leaving, while painful, wasn't the end of our story. It was the beginning of something else. Something better than if I'd stayed," she said quietly. "Not better, just different." Thomas leaned forward. "Diane, I didn't bring you here to make you feel guilty, or to show off what we accomplished without you. I brought you here because this place represents healing. For me, for the kids, and for hundreds of other families. I thought maybe it could be part of your healing too." Tears filled her eyes. "I don't deserve this kindness from you. This isn't about deserving. It's about moving forward." He paused. "The kids know you're sick and getting better. They're willing to get to know who you are now if that's what you want." "What about you?" she asked. "What do you want?" Thomas smiled slightly. "I want them to have closure, whatever form that takes. I want them to know you're okay. The rest, we'll figure out as we go." Later, they all gathered in a small conference room. Thomas, the 5 children, and Diane, The conversation was awkward at times, painful at others, but real. Alex asked innocent questions about where she lived and what her apartment looked like. Kevin wondered if she still liked the same music. Lily remained quiet but attentive. Jessica asked pointed questions about her treatment and recovery. Josh mostly listened, his expression thoughtful. Diane answered everything truthfully, making no excuses for her choices but explaining the darkness that had consumed her. "Depression lies to you," she told them. "It told me you'd be better without me, that I was hurting you by staying. I know now that wasn't true, but I believed it then." "Are you still sad?" Alex asked. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But I have help now. Medicine that works for me, a doctor I talk to. I've learned to recognize when the dark thoughts are coming and what to do about them." As the afternoon wore on, the tension gradually eased. They didn't become a happy, reunited family. Too much time had passed, too much hurt remained for that fairy tale. But something new began to take shape. A fragile connection, a possibility. When it was time for her to leave, Diane stood in the lobby where she'd first encountered Alex hours earlier. The children said goodbye with varying degrees of warmth, a hug from Kevin, a tentative smile from Lily, respectful nods from Josh and Jessica, and a cheerful wave from Alex, who had already invited her to watch his baseball game the next time she visited. Thomas walked her outside to the waiting taxi. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. "Thank you," she said simply, "for raising them so well, for building something meaningful from pain, for allowing me to see them." "They're amazing kids," Thomas replied. "They got through the hardest parts. Now they're just curious about who you are." "And you?" Diane asked. "Are you curious too?" Thomas looked back at the building where their children waited. "I know who I am now because of all this. Maybe it's time to find out who you've become too." As her taxi pulled away, Diane looked back at the center, at the life Thomas had built from the broken pieces she'd left behind. She hadn't expected forgiveness today, and she hadn't fully received it. But she'd been given something perhaps more valuable: the chance to witness how resilience, determination, and love could transform devastation into something that helped others heal. The foundation that bore the family name wasn't just Thomas's legacy or the children's future. In a way she never could have anticipated, it was also hers, born from her darkest decision, her greatest regret. She couldn't change the past, but perhaps she could be part of this future they were building, not as the mother she failed to be, but as someone new, someone still worthy of knowing.